The plane was buzzing with activity as passengers made their way down the narrow aisles, each one carrying a mix of excitement and impatience. The overhead bins creaked with the weight of carry-ons, and flight attendants greeted everyone with polite smiles as they navigated the sea of people. In the midst of it all, a man in his late 30s, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, moved with the kind of self-assured confidence that was hard to ignore. He had the kind of look that said, "I'm important," and everyone around him seemed to take note. His neatly combed hair and expensive watch made it clear he wasn't just another businessman. He was someone who valued luxury, someone who had status. As he reached his seat, his eyes casually scanned the row, and that's when he noticed her. A woman in her early 30s, dressed simply in a modest dress and plain shoes. She had the kind of quiet presence that went unnoticed by most, but to him, her plain appearance immediately screamed middle class at best. She looked like someone who couldn't afford first class, let alone the kind of lifestyle he was used to. He couldn't help but frown as he saw that his seat was right next to hers. This wasn't what he had hoped for. The man's eyes flickered over the woman's simple dress, her shoes that looked well-worn but not expensive, and her neat but unassuming appearance. His lips curled into a subtle, dismissive smile. He had no intention of sitting next to someone who looked like they couldn't even afford a proper wardrobe. His eyes shifted uncomfortably as he glanced at the empty seat next to her, his mind already making judgments. There was no way he was going to spend the next few hours crammed beside someone like that. He sighed dramatically, drawing the attention of a nearby flight attendant. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth but laced with a certain arrogance. "I was hoping to get a better seat. I simply cannot sit next to, well, let's just say I need more comfort for this flight, and I'm afraid the seating arrangement here is less than ideal." The flight attendant, though taken aback by his tone, kept her composure. "I'm sorry, sir. Let me see if I can assist you." She quickly checked the seating chart and offered him a seat further away, with more legroom and space. He accepted without a second thought, muttering his thanks as if he were doing her a favor. With a smirk of satisfaction, he grabbed his bag and moved to his new seat. His shoulders were squared, and he felt a rush of superiority. He had avoided the discomfort of sitting next to someone who clearly didn't belong in his world. The woman, however, felt the sting of his words more than she cared to show. She sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, trying to ignore the hurt. She could feel the eyes of nearby passengers on her, and for a moment she thought about leaving the flight altogether. But instead, she took a deep breath and stared out of the window, reminding herself that people like him weren't worth the tears. As the plane taxied down the runway, the man settled into his new seat with a sense of triumph. His legs stretched out comfortably, and the extra space made him feel even more important than he already did. The small inconvenience of having to switch seats faded quickly from his mind, replaced by the comfort of knowing he was no longer near the unrefined woman. He leaned back, letting out a quiet sigh of satisfaction, his eyes scanning the in-flight magazine without truly reading it. Meanwhile, the woman remained in her original seat, feeling the discomfort of the cramped space. Her knees brushed against the seat in front of her, and her shoulder pressed against the armrest. Yet she showed no sign of complaint. Her hands remained steady in her lap as she stared out of the small window, watching the world below shrink away with each passing second. The sound of the engine starting up was a familiar hum in the background, but her mind was far away. For a moment, there was a brief flash of emotion in her eyes. Regret, perhaps, or a fleeting memory. But she quickly masked it. It wasn't the first time she'd been judged for her appearance, and it wouldn't be the last. The woman took a deep breath, focusing on the calmness she had cultivated over the years. The flight was only just beginning, and she would endure it, just as she always did. The plane ascended higher, and the world below seemed to fade away. As the flight continued, the woman remained mostly still, her attention focused inward. She reached into her small, unassuming bag and pulled out a well-worn book. It looked like the kind of novel that had been read over and over, its pages soft from use. She flipped it open but didn't read for long. Instead, she set it aside and reached for a small leather-bound journal. Her fingers lingered over the cover for a moment before she began writing with quiet concentration, the motion of her pen steady and deliberate. Finally, she reached into the bag again, this time pulling out an envelope. The letter inside was marked with a wax seal, and her hands, delicate but firm, carefully unfolded it. She read it with a serious expression, her brow furrowing slightly as she took in the contents. The letter seemed important, urgent even, but she kept her emotions in check, as if the weight of its significance was nothing new. Meanwhile, the man, now more relaxed in his seat, was trying to settle in for the flight. He had let go of his earlier discomfort, sinking into the plush fabric of his seat. His eyes began to wander around the cabin, first aimlessly, then more focused as he noticed the woman beside him once again. He tried to ignore her, but there was something about the way she seemed so calm and composed, so detached from the bustling world around her, that caught his attention. The soft murmur of her voice broke through his thoughts. She was speaking quietly into her phone, so he couldn't make out every word, but the tone was unmistakably professional. At first, he thought nothing of it, assuming it was just a casual conversation. But then he heard her mention a large financial transaction and upcoming meetings with a tone of authority that immediately piqued his interest. His curiosity grew, and he listened more closely, his eyes narrowing. She was speaking about business deals, large-scale negotiations, the kinds of things he dealt with regularly. He leaned forward slightly, watching her more intently. There was something in the way she spoke, in the confidence of her words, that made him reconsider his initial judgment. He had assumed she was just another woman who didn't belong in his world, but now he wasn't so sure. He couldn't help himself. He kept glancing over at her, trying to catch more details. Her modest appearance was at odds with the way she spoke on the phone, with the ease she had when discussing major business matters. Slowly, the realization began to dawn on him. This woman wasn't who he had thought she was. She wasn't some random passenger he could dismiss. She was someone important. But how important, exactly? The woman continued her phone conversation, her voice calm and measured as she navigated through the complex details of her work. She spoke with such poise that it was clear she was no stranger to high-stakes business, and yet there was no arrogance in her tone, just a quiet confidence. The more the man listened, the more he realized just how deeply embedded she was in the world he himself inhabited. She mentioned partnerships with top companies, negotiations for multi-million-dollar deals, and travel arrangements to international conferences. His mind raced as he began to connect the dots. Her words painted a picture of someone who was not just wealthy, but highly influential, someone who operated in circles far beyond his own. She wasn't just a businesswoman, she was a power player in her industry. The simplicity of her attire seemed so out of place compared to the world she inhabited. How could someone like her, someone with such a powerful network, look so ordinary? The man shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The more he listened, the more his sense of superiority crumbled. He had judged her based on nothing but her appearance, and now the truth was slowly unfolding in front of him. She was the type of woman who could make or break a deal with a single phone call. She didn't need a tailored suit or flashy jewelry to prove her worth. She had something far more powerful: influence. Then, just as he was processing this realization, the woman said something that made his heart skip a beat. She casually mentioned a charity event she was organizing, one that would be attended by some of the most influential figures in the world. She spoke of it as if it were just another detail in her packed schedule, but the weight of her words hit him hard. She wasn't just well-connected. She was the kind of person who moved entire industries, who could have any person in the room at her beck and call. The man felt a hot flush of guilt creep up his neck. He had judged her so harshly, assuming she was beneath him, when in reality, she was far above him in ways he couldn't have imagined. A sinking feeling of embarrassment settled in his chest. How could he have been so blind? As if sensing his stare, the woman's gaze shifted toward him. For a moment, their eyes locked, and he froze. There was no anger or accusation in her expression, only a quiet, knowing calm. Her eyes held no judgment, but they were piercing, as if she could see right through him. The silence between them stretched out, thick with unspoken words. The man swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his mistake hanging between them. She turned away first, breaking the connection. But the damage was done. The man sat back in his seat, his face flushed with embarrassment, realizing too late just how wrong he had been. The plane finally touched down, its wheels skimming the runway, as the man sat back in his seat, his mind racing. He couldn't stop thinking about the conversation he'd overheard, the revelation that had shattered his arrogant assumptions. Every moment of his behavior, every glance he had thrown her way, now felt like a crushing weight on his chest. He had been so quick to judge her, to dismiss her because of her simple appearance, and now he could barely stand the thought of it. As the passengers began to gather their things and prepare to disembark, the man sat frozen for a moment, the shame eating at him. He had been wrong, so wrong, and the reality of it hit him with full force. He had been rude, dismissive, and arrogant, and now he couldn't undo the damage he had caused. Nervously, he stood up, hoping to catch her before she left. His hands felt clammy as he navigated through the crowd, and his heart pounded in his chest. He finally spotted her, standing near the exit, gathering her things with calm efficiency. "Excuse me," he said, his voice awkward, trying to muster the courage to speak. I just wanted to apologize for earlier. I was wrong. I shouldn't have judged you the way I did." The woman didn't look at him immediately, continuing to pack her bag. When she finally met his gaze, her expression was unreadable, calm, composed. She said nothing about the rude comments he had made earlier. Instead, her voice was gentle, but there was an edge of wisdom in it. "Don't judge a book by its cover," she said softly. "You might not know the story behind the pages." The man opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He nodded mutely, feeling the full weight of his mistake. His apology felt hollow now, too little, too late. As she turned and walked away, he remained frozen, rooted to the spot, his face burning with regret. He had learned the lesson, but the cost had been steep. The man watched as the woman turned and walked away, her steps measured and confident. She moved through the crowd with an effortless grace, as if nothing had happened. No harsh words, no awkward apologies, no judgment. To her, it was simply another day, another flight. He stood there for a moment longer, still trying to process the weight of his mistake. He glanced around, trying to shake off the feeling of shame that clung to him like a heavy cloak. As the crowd began to thin out, he made his way toward the exit, trying to focus on the mundane details of the airport. But nothing seemed to distract him from the nagging guilt that wouldn't let go. Outside, the woman had already reached a private terminal, where she was greeted warmly by a team of staff and a group of VIPs. Their respectful smiles and formal bows made it clear that she was someone of great importance. She smiled politely, her presence commanding the kind of respect that only comes with power and influence. The man's eyes widened as he realized the full extent of her stature. She wasn't just any businesswoman. She was someone who commanded entire industries, someone who didn't need to prove herself to anyone. Sitting down in the lounge, the man finally allowed himself to reflect. The lesson was clear, but it had come too late. His arrogance had clouded his judgment, and now, as he sat there alone, he understood the true cost of his actions. He had judged her by appearances, and in doing so, had lost a lesson he would never forget. Thank you for watching this story. We hope it reminded you about the importance of not judging others based on appearances and the powerful lessons we can learn from our mistakes. Sometimes, we need to step back and see the bigger picture before making assumptions, and this story shows just how important that is. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with your friends so they can enjoy it too. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more emotional and thought-provoking stories like this one. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What did you learn from this story? Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.